Hey guys, tonight we travel back in time, way back, to a world without smartphones, electric clocks, or blaring alarm apps that jolt you upright like a fire drill. Instead, we're headed to a place where time flows like water, incense marks the hours, and emperors lie awake wondering if their bell ringers remembered to wake up on time. You're standing in the middle of the Tang Dynasty, around the year 750 CE, just before dawn. The palace is quiet, wrapped in velvet dark shadows, but you can feel the tension in the air. Somewhere deep inside, the emperor, yes, the emperor himself, is awake, tossing and turning, wondering when the sun will rise, and if anyone will be late again. Because if there's one thing that can ruin an imperial morning, it's a bureaucrat who misses a ceremonial kneeling window. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and local time in the comments. Curious where in the world we're winding down together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot, walking across lacquered wooden floors, careful not to wake the silk-robed guards standing like statues. The palace corridors are hushed except for the occasional thump of a guard's shifting weight, or the flutter of a bat slipping through an open screen. Even the night breeze holds its breath. Timekeeping, you realize, is no casual business here. In this empire, time is as valuable as jade, and it is measured, believe it or not, by things like dripping water, burning incense, and the occasional rooster who may or may not show up on time. But for now, your journey starts at the very top, with the emperor's private quarters. He hasn't slept in hours. Why? Because timekeeping is broken again. The bell to mark the 5th watch, the one that should have rung right before dawn, was late by 7 whole minutes yesterday. 7. And no one dares mention it aloud. But someone in the palace almost got demoted over that. You pass an antechamber filled with quiet scribes, their brushes poised over scrolls filled with timetables and duty rosters. One young official yawns so hard he accidentally splashes ink across a month's worth of ceremonial bell logs. Oops. Hope that wasn't for the Empress. The Tang Dynasty, for all its poetry and art, runs like a well-oiled machine, or at least it wants to, but there's no oil here, just water. Specifically, the clepsydra, or water clock, installed deep in the palace's timekeeper chamber. It's elegant in theory. Water drips from one bronze bowl into another at precisely calculated pace. As the lower bowl fills, it nudges a small float connected to a pointer, which moves slowly across a time scale. Except it's drafty tonight, and someone left a window open, which means the water's evaporating just enough to throw the entire system off by, say, 7 critical minutes. And that's not even counting the humidity factor, or the occasional rat incident, or the time a bored junior monk tried to speed it up to get out of a night shift early. Historians still argue whether these early water clocks were ever truly accurate, or just ceremonial theater. Did they really measure time? Or were they just a kind of royal placebo? Beautiful. But mostly they make people feel organized. Either way, the emperor wants results. You tiptoe past the water clock room now. A nervous technician is checking the float levels, muttering to himself. He looks like he's aged 10 years in 1 week. In his trembling hands is a bamboo stylus used to mark the time readings. His tunic is rumpled, and his eyes are red. He hasn't slept either. And this isn't even the final version of the clock. That will come later, centuries down the line, when Song Dynasty engineers build gigantic astronomical towers powered by water wheels and gears. But that's a midnight story for another section. Right now, things are still, how shall we say, more rustic. The bell towers that mark the city's official hours rely on human timekeepers, not automatic timers. These men sit in towers all night, watching clepsydras and incense clocks, ringing bronze bells at designated intervals. And if they fall asleep, well, let's just say the last guy who missed the third watch bell is currently scrubbing latrines in a border garrison. That's if he's lucky. You make your way out of the palace compound now, slipping past silent gardens and a koi pond so still it looks like lacquer. There's a pagoda rising in the distance, the silhouette of a watchman just barely visible behind a paper lantern. He's pacing. Good. He's awake. You pause beside a plum tree. The night air tinged with blossoms and the faintest note of incense. Someone just lit a timing stick somewhere. A slow burning coil that releases different aromas at different hours. Lavender for midnight. Jasmine for the fourth watch. Maybe sandalwood for dawn. Time, in this world, smells sweet. And it's tracked not with alarms or beeps, but with bells and bowls and scent and silence. The human body isn't meant to leap awake. It's meant to stir gently, like bamboo swaying a breeze. You begin to understand now why sleep is so sacred here. It's not just rest, it's rhythm, and waking up is an art. Still, the emperor won't be pleased if the next bell is off by even a whisper. So you keep walking, ears tuned for the distant chime. Will it be early? Will it be late? Or will someone, somewhere, finally get it just right? You don't have to wait long. A soft clang ripples through the darkness, distant but unmistakable, like a pebble tossed into a still lake. It echoes down alleyways and over tiled rooftops, vibrating in your chest like a sigh from the city itself. You smile. Someone rang the bronze bowl right on time. Probably. You drift now through the scholarly quarters of Chang'an, past moonlit courtyards where night owls still scribble poems by candlelight. The streets are hushed, but behind lattice windows, a different kind of timekeeping unfolds. Less official, more personal. This is where you first meet the water clock. Not the grand clepsydras and bell towers, but the humble versions that live in households. Elegant little contraptions. 2 bronze bowls, one dripping steadily into the other, often accompanied by painted scales or carved grooves to mark the passage of hours. In a quiet study, a gray-bearded gentleman dozes on a mat beside one. He spent the night copying lines of Confucius, his brush resting loosely in his fingers. The water trickles in a soothing rhythm beside him, almost like a leaky faucet with a master's degree. You crouch beside the device. The top bowl is nearly empty. The lower one's float has nudged a little lever, and with a muted clink, a small bead rolls across a shallow tray to tap a hanging bell. Not loud, just a ping, but enough to wake him gently. He stirs, blinks, murmurs something about the fourth watch, and stretches his arms like an old crane. This is his alarm clock. Quiet, predictable, and merciful. Mainstream historians agree that water clocks like this, local in Chinese, date back to at least the Han Dynasty, maybe earlier. But their golden age? That was now, during Tang and Song times. Craftsmen and scholars competed to perfect these devices, adding scales, floats, and even tiny animal figures that would tip forward when the float reached a certain height. But accuracy? That was always a bit slippery. Humidity, dust, even the shape of the bowls could affect the flow rate. Some scholars use standardized drip nozzles carved from bamboo. Others swore by goose quills. Still others blamed the bowls when they themselves overslept. Classic. Historians still argue whether Tang-era engineers prioritized consistency or symbolism. Was a soft chime meant to wake you, or just remind you that time, like water, can never be truly held? You trail behind the scholar, now as he rises and pads into garden. The sun isn't up, but the sky has turned from velvet to silk gray. He pours tea, slowly, deliberately, letting the steam brush his face. No rush. The chime has done its job. He's awake, and the world has followed. Elsewhere in the city, government officials will soon open their scrolls. Market vendors will lift the tarps from their carts. The fishmonger will grumble about bad shrimp again. But here in this courtyard, time still drips gently from bronze to bronze. You glance back at the clock. The lower bowl is almost full now. Soon, someone will empty it and reset the process. Probably his apprentice, who you now spot dozing behind a bush. And in that moment, you realize the brilliance. These clocks don't command time. They respect it. They collaborate with it. You're not being dragged out of bed by a buzzing monstrosity. You're being nudged, like a friend tapping your shoulder before sunrise. There's even a rumor that some noble households train birds to mimic the water clock's tones, just in case the mechanism failed. You imagine a parrot chirping ding at precisely the wrong moment. Slightly adorable, slightly annoying. As the sky begins to brighten, you drift back toward the main avenue. You pass another water clock, this one elaborate and tucked inside a scholar's shrine. It features carved dragons along the rim and a jade pointer that moves so slowly you can't see it shift. But after 5 minutes, it's definitely not where it was. This one doesn't chime. It's purely for watching. A meditative device meant not to wake, but to remind. Time, it says, is happening even if you don't hear it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe, in a world where life depends on seasons and sunrises, you don't need to measure time so much as you need to trust it. You only need a gentle bell, a slow drip, a scent that floats. Because here, waking up isn't about jerking upright and racing the clock. It's about flowing from dream to dawn without spilling a drop. Your walk leads you to a monastery tucked beneath a weeping cypress grove. A long, low hum seems to hang in the air before you even enter. Not a voice, not quite music. Something softer, smokier. You step inside and it hits you. Sandalwood, clove, a faint edge of bitter orange. Time smells good in here. This isn't a place of bells or dripping bowls. No tick, no tock, just long trails of incense curling through carved dragon mouths, their smoke trailing upward in lazy spirals toward a painted ceiling. The monks, silent, slipper-footed, float past you like ghosts. And you realize something. They're not just burning incense to make the place smell nice. They're measuring it. You kneel beside a time-keeping stick, resting like a fallen wand on a small bronze tray. It's thicker at one end, marked with tiny knots and patterns in colored sand. As it burns down, slowly, precisely, it reaches each section and releases a different scent. Musk, then mint, then something like burned paper. Each stage marks a new coup or segment of the day. This is the Xiangzhong, the incense clock. Mainstream historians have confirmed these were widely used across China, especially in Buddhist temples and scholarly households, by the Song dynasty and onward. The more advanced versions even included tiny threads or metal weights laid into the incense paste. When the flame reached them, they drop, tap a chime, or set off a puff of powder. A gentle tick, but scented, like if Yankee Candle hired a horologist. Tonight, you watch as a monk carefully lays a spiral incense into its copper pan. It's shaped like a coiled snake, one long, continuous trail. He lights the outer end and bows his head. The clock has started, and there's something hypnotic about it. You sit beside it, cross-legged on the cool floor, and let the perfume wrap around your head like a scarf. A few meters away, another monk quietly notes the time change on parchment. No need for shouting. No alarms. No snooze button. This is a clock that respects silence. You chuckle, thinking about your own alarm clock back home. A screeching slab of LED tyranny that startles you into consciousness each morning. Here, if you sleep through the incense shift, the worst that happens is you miss the saffron scent. But don't let the gentleness fool you. Some versions of incense clocks were absurdly precise. Wealthier homes had incense trails measured down to the coup, roughly 15-minute segments. There's even mention of court eunuchs tasked with ensuring incense clocks align perfectly with the imperial time drums. Imagine being a guy whose whole job was royal candle accuracy enforcer. Probably not a big hit parties. Historians still argue whether these clocks were ever used for military timing, or whether they remained purely ceremonial and domestic. One theory suggests traveling officials carried portable incense boxes to measure time on the road, like ancient flammable wristwatches. If true, imagine fumbling with a hot stick during a windy rainstorm just to figure out if it's lunchtime. Still, there's something romantic about it, isn't there? A clock that doesn't tick, but glows. One that doesn't bark, but perfumes. You lean back against a stone wall and let your eyes close for a moment. Time, you realize, doesn't have to be sharp or jarring. It can creep up on you like incense, soft and strange. It can mark your day not with shrieks or vibrations, but with fragrance, slowly shifting the air around you until, before you notice, morning has become afternoon. You open your eyes. The incense trail has shrunk by another inch. Somewhere in the distance, a monk gently strikes a wooden fish drum. Not because anyone's late, just because it's time. Your feet find stone steps slick with morning dew as you wander down from the monastery. But before you can shake the scent of sandalwood from your robes, a curious sound pricks your ears. A puff, then a hiss, then something that can only be described as a wheezing snort. It's not a person, not quite an animal. You follow it around a crumbling garden wall and discover a tangle of bronze tubing, spinning gears, and wooden weights precariously balanced like a teetering game of ancient Jenga. And sitting cross-legged beside it all, cheerfully humming, is an old man with a bun like a dumpling in a toolbox that looks one sneeze away from collapse. "Don't be alarmed," he says without looking up, as if he's been expecting you. She only roars when she's hungry, and then it moves, out from behind the bamboo scaffolding, with a loud clank and a deflating hiss, rolls what appears to be a mechanical dragon, about the size of a goat. It's carved from red lacquered wood, inlaid with brass scales, and fitted with no fewer than 4 bells, 2 horns, and a copper whistle that lets out a mournful hoot every time it hits a bump. This is your introduction to the Song Dynasty's early mechanical alarms. You blink in disbelief as the man explains the device. It's powered by water weight, drawn from an overhead cistern, which slowly lowers a bucket over time. As the weight shifts, a mechanism turns gears inside the dragon's belly. At the final moment, sunrise, it triggers a system of pulleys that flares the dragon's mouth and blows steam through a hidden whistle. In short, it wakes people up by pretending to sneeze fire. Welcome to the world of Zhang Xishuan, Su Song, and other early Chinese mechanical thinkers who dabbled in proto-robotics long before Europe thought clocks should be round. Su Song, in particular, is credited with building an elaborate water-powered astronomical clock tower around the 11th century. It had armillary spheres, celestial models, and, most importantly, wooden figurines that popped out an hour to clang gongs and ring bells. Mainstream historical records confirm these striking clocks were complex, weight-driven machines often incorporating flowing water and clever gearing systems. And yes, some of them had mechanical animals that, according to palace documents, announce the hour in beastly voice. Scholars still argue whether the dragon clock you're looking at is an actual surviving example or just a modern artisan's homage to those lost machines. The few blueprints that survive are ambiguous at best, and some experts suspect that the loudest parts, the whistles, the shrieks, may have been added later for flair. Still, there's no denying the theatrical genius behind it. You crouch beside the dragon and watch as the man resets it. He slides a bronze plate into its underbelly, pours a ladle of water into the top, and carefully adjusts a copper pipe that channels steam toward a hidden whistle. The device hiccups, sputters, then releases a polite burp. "Needs more vinegar," he mutters, as if that makes any kind of engineering sense. You grin. It's not quite a Casio alarm clock, but it has something better: personality. As the dragon rolls a few inches forward, you notice its wheels are decorated with tiny time marks, hour notches burned into the wood. As it moves, it literally counts its own journey through time. You imagine being woken each morning not by shrill beeping, but by a snorting dragon toddling across your bedroom floor, steam puffing from its nose, bells ringing behind it like a parade that forgot to plan a route. This wasn't just a novelty for nobles. Records show that temples and some upper-class homes had mechanical alarms to mark ritual hours, tea preparation, or study breaks. While commoners stuck with roosters and clanging pots, the elite had entire machines that timed life to sound, steam, and spectacle. And of course, they gave them names. The laughing elephant, the whispering bird, the tiger that roared at noon. You ask the old man what his dragon is called. He pauses, pats its head, and says, "Little honker." Perfect. You lie back on the stone path and watch steam curl above you, clouds kissing bronze. The dragon lets out one more whispery screech and rolls to a stop. A bell dings. A day begins. And not a single digital beep to be heard. By now, you're used to time slipping past not in seconds or minutes, but in puffs of incense dripping spoons and wheezing dragons. So when your next stop greets you with silence, deep, temple-thick silence, it's oddly disorienting. You're standing in a scholar's courtyard from the Tang Dynasty, maybe the 8th century. A delicate rain has begun to fall, soft as whispers on silk. The stone tiles beneath your feet glisten. You're certain you should hear a chime or bell or something But no, just that muted, rhythmic hush of rain. And then, from beneath a clay roof awning, comes a soft plop, then another, followed by a surprisingly crisp ding. You step under the overhang, and there it is, a clepsydra or water clock. But this one's a little different. Instead of marking time on a scale, it does something almost poetic. It drops beads of water onto a delicate metal plate that sings with every hit. Different plates make different tones, some low and warm, others high and sharp, like tuning forks dipped in moonlight. Mainstream historians agree that clepsydras were used in China as early as the Han Dynasty, but the Tang era brought refinements. Scholars of the time valued elegance and subtlety in their tools. Everything from inkstones to time-keeping instruments had to marry utility with beauty. This particular clepsydra, likely owned by a retired official or poet, is part clock, part musical performance. You crouch beside it, watching the mechanism work. Rainwater funnels from a jar into a carefully carved bamboo chute, dripping at regular intervals onto a rotating plate, marked with the 12 traditional Chinese double hours. With each drip, a bell-like ring answers back, a soft, sustained note like the very air sighing. The scholar, it seems like the time is tea, poetry, and naps to music. And honestly, who doesn't? There's something about it that soothes the bones. Even the rain seems to fall in time. And this was no one-off invention. Some Tang and Song sources describe garden clocks designed specifically for rainy seasons, where drip pans were calibrated to match the rate of rainfall. Others use sound differently. Tiny gongs struck by floating rods or stone chimes moved by shifting counterweights. The result? A clock that told time by singing. Quirky fact. There was even a regional trend, possibly short-lived, of using hollow gourds as echo chambers. Water would fall into them, and the resonant note would act as a subtle hourly chime. Imagine drifting off to sleep with the sound of time blooming gently inside a pumpkin. Of course, historians still argue whether these musical clocks were widespread or just the indulgence of artsy bureaucrats with too much time and access to silver bells. Some say such devices never made it beyond elite circles. Others believe simpler versions existed in smaller towns, repurposing clay bowls and old utensils. But in this courtyard at this hour, there is no debate. You can hear it. Ding. The next droplet lands. Another note joins the melody. And with each sound, the day reshapes itself, not into deadlines or alarm buzzes, but into intervals of song. You lean back beneath the eaves and imagine living this way, measuring life not in hours, but in tones. No calendars shouting obligations, just music that told you when it was time to stretch, to drink tea, to write down that one thought that fluttered through your head like a moth. A servant passes by, placing a hot stone under a clay pillow. Likely a nap is coming soon. You follow their lead, lowering yourself onto a wooden bench warmed by sunlight. Your ears stay tuned for the next soft plop, the next quiet ding. Even in stillness, the clock is moving. Even in silence, time is singing. And you're learning to listen. It's not long before your peaceful musical nap is interrupted. Not rudely, but curiously, by the sound of voices drifting in from the alley behind the scholar's house. Not the metallic notes of time dripping through water this time, but something more human. Laughter, clattering, rhythmic stomps. You follow the sound through a narrow gate and find yourself inside a bustling street market, likely late Ming Dynasty, maybe early 17th century. Stalls crowd the path like overgrown mushrooms, each one bursting with color, scent, and, more surprisingly, noise. And yet again you hear it, the unmistakable tone of a wake-up call. But this time, it's not a dragon or a water bead or a bronze bell. It's a man with a clapper in one hand and a bundle of bamboo pipes slung over his shoulder like a sleepy pan flute. He's a morning caller, one of dozens hired in many cities during this era to walk the streets at dawn and wake residents for prayer, trade, or travel. His job is part alarm clock, part news anchor, part town gossip, and all performance. He bangs the clapper once, crack, and then lets out a sing-song call that rhymes. Something about waking with a phoenix and not missing the rice cakes. You don't understand all the tones, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Children giggle from the windows. Dogs bark in time. Mainstream records describe these human alarm clocks, sometimes called night watchmen, though many work just before dawn, as essential figures in large towns. They weren't official government workers, but were often hired by neighborhood associations. Some carried gongs, others banged pans. A few blew whistles carved to mimic birdsong, especially in upscale districts where people didn't want to be jolted awake. Your guy, though, clearly believes in flair. He pauses at every intersection, raises his bamboo pipes, and blows a note that sounds somewhere between crow and a clarinet. Not loud, but piercing enough to reach closed shutters. Then he slaps his clapper again and sings a new verse, this one warning that the bathhouses are almost full. A quirky fringe fact here. In certain regions of southern China, especially port towns like Quanzhou, morning callers developed signature sounds that acted like personal brands. Some even competed with one another. The rooster of Ningbo was reportedly so effective that locals use his rhythm as a kind of metronome to time their cooking. Historians still argue whether these callers were predecessors to professional town criers or more closely linked to musical traditions like street opera. There's also debate over whether the rhymes were spontaneous or passed down like folk poems. One surviving scroll records nearly 40 different wake-up chants, from polite proverbs to not-so-subtle jabs at sleepy merchants. The man in front of you seems to invent as he goes. He mixes metaphor with shopping tips. At one point, he rhymes mildew with tofu. It kind of works. You trail him for a while, letting the crowd part around you like you're a stone in a murmuring stream. He stops by a bakery stall and trades a rhyme for a sticky rice bun. Apparently, poetry is a valid currency in this economy. You watch him take a bite, still chewing as he lets out another note from the pipes. Steam from the bun curls into the air like a lazy dragon. And again, time shifts. You're not watching minutes tick by. You're following rhythms. A merchant lifts her shutters when she hears the third call. A grandmother stirs her congee. A child runs out with a copper coin clutched in their palm, ready to buy the first hot pastry of the day. These weren't clocks in the strict sense, but they were known times, shared signals, an audible way to say, you're not alone, the day is starting, and here's a rhyme to get you moving. The caller gives you a wink as he rounds the next corner, whistling low and hoarse like a wooden flute with a secret. You lean against a lantern post, nibble the rest of the rice bun he handed you without asking, and smile. This was how people rose in cities before smartphones and sunrise alarms. With verse, with breath, with sound, a neighborhood heartbeat. And if you overslept, well, you'd hear about it in tomorrow's verse. The morning caller fades into the market hum, and you take a moment to breathe in the scent of rising steam buns, roasted chestnuts, and the faintest trace of sandalwood incense clinging to your sleeve from earlier. Time in this place doesn't rush. It ambles, stretches, loops and spirals like the curls of tea steam rising into an open sky. You wander down a quieter lane now, where merchants have yet to open and shadows still linger. And that's when you hear the sharp clack of wood on stone. Once, twice, paused. Then again, you turn toward the sound, and there it is, a wooden fish or muyu, being struck rhythmically by a monk beginning his morning rounds. This isn't just a religious rite. In some Buddhist monasteries, especially during the Song and Yuan dynasties, these wooden percussion instruments, carved to resemble stylized fish with wide eyes and ridged backs, served as internal alarm clocks for the monastic community. Their hollow bodies amplify the sound, deep, resonant, and gently insistive, like a knock on your spirit. You follow the monk silently. He walks slowly, in measured steps, striking the fish every few paces. The clack echoes through the stone corridors and open-air halls of the monastery, calling fellow monks to wake, to pray, to breathe. Mainstream scholars agree that the muyu was part of a broader system of time-keeping in monastic life, where daily routines were structured down to the breath. Morning meditation, food preparation, scripture copying, alms collecting, and evening chanting. The sound wasn't just functional. It was spiritual, a gentle tug back to awareness. You pause near a corner where a massive bronze bell hangs, dormant for now, waiting for a different hour. A novice monk hurries by with sleep, still clinging to his eyes, bowing quickly as he passes the fish striker. No words are spoken. None are needed. Then the rhythm changes. A second monk is joined in, using a cloud gong, which produces a lighter, chiming sound that dances above the wooden clacks like wind chimes skipping across stone. Together, they create a layered soundscape that marks not only time but mood. One note grounds, the other uplifts, and here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some monasteries reportedly train blind monks as official timekeepers, not in spite of the lack of sight, but because of their heightened sensitivity to rhythm and sound. They were known as ear monks, and they could track hours by subtle shifts in ambient noise, birdsong, echo behavior, or even the drip patterns from rooftop tiles. Historians still argue whether these time-keeping duties rotated daily or were assigned permanently, with some suggesting that certain monastic orders treated the role as a lifetime calling. What's clear, though, is that sound, not sight, was the dominant clock within sacred spaces. The monk you follow finally stops at a meditation hall. He bows to the wooden fish, sets a striker down, and quietly disappears inside, his robe whispering like a breeze through pine. You linger at the threshold, where morning light has begun to seep in through a lattice window. Somewhere deeper in the compound, someone begins to chant, a single, low note that rises and falls like breath over still water. The air hums, and it strikes you. In this place, time isn't about getting somewhere faster. It's about returning, again and again, to where you already are, your feet, your breath, the gentle ache in your shoulders, the sound of a carved wooden fish remembering its purpose. These are the hours. These are the bells. A soft wind curls around you as the courtyard stirs to life. Tea is poured into tiny clay cups. Incense curls upward from a nearby shrine, and the world resets. Not with blaring alarm, but with the resonance of quiet routine. You stretch your arms, feeling the rhythm of the monastery settle in your chest like a second heartbeat. Time here does not shout. It invites. You follow the rhythm of that invitation out of the monastery gates into the gathering morning. The air is warmer now, touched with kitchen smoke and the crisp smell of laundry water hitting sun-warmed stone. The city has begun to buzz, though even its hustle has a kind of sleepy grace. A side street calls to you, not loud, but with a gentle clang of iron on iron. You peek around a corner and find yourself facing something oddly familiar, yet charmingly ancient. A water-driven puppet clock performing its first mechanical drama of the day. A small crowd is gathered, mostly children and the elderly, sitting on low stools with breakfast in hand. The puppet clock stands on a raised stone platform under a bamboo awning, about the size of a horse cart. Behind it, concealed by decorative panels of lacquered wood, is a network of gears, weights, and bamboo piping, all fed by a gently flowing stream diverted from a nearby canal. Then, with a sudden click, a wooden hatch swings open. A little warrior puppet stomps out, his arm rising stiffly to clang a tiny gong. Tang! Behind him, a scholar puppet rolls by on wheels, followed by a miniature dragon waving a paper fan. The entire procession takes less than a minute, then disappears with another creak into the wooden frame. And just like that, it's the hour of the rabbit. You blink. Was that a puppet parade for time? Yes, it absolutely was. Mainstream historical records place these automaton-style timepieces back to the Song dynasty, around the 11th century, when engineer Su Song and his colleagues constructed clock towers that blended science, art, and a dash of whimsy. These towers often use escapement mechanisms, basically a way to regulate the flow of energy through gears to move celestial globes and puppets in precise hourly increments. Su Song's most famous tower, built in Kaifeng, reportedly had doors that opened every hour to release mechanical figures that rang bells, beat drums, or carried symbolic objects. Timekeeping wasn't just informative. It was entertaining, theatrical, delightful, and the tradition filtered down to the street level. Water-powered puppet clocks became a form of public timekeeping, especially in marketplaces or festivals. Kids would gather to watch their favorite characters chime the hour. Vendors could glance over and adjust their pricing, cooking, or hawking rhythms accordingly. A quirky detail. In some southern towns, clocks were known to feature regional folklore, a tiger-headed deity instead of a dragon, or a local rice goddess carrying an umbrella. One town even built a timekeeping puppet that burped smoke to signal lunchtime. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether these clocks were truly reliable for precision timekeeping, or more for public morale and spectacle. Some dismiss them as novelties, glorified cuckoo clocks. Others point to municipal records that show city schedules, water rations, prayer calls, merchant curfews, were adjusted to these puppet-driven hour marks. Whatever the truth, they clearly held meaning. Back in the square, another hatch clicks open. This time it's a carp with a hat and a lute. It flops once, spins on a tiny turntable, and vanishes to uproarious giggles from a nearby toddler. You can't help but smile. Think about it. When was the last time your clock entertained you? The show ends, and the crowd begins to drift away, back to stalls and errands. You linger a moment longer, watching the water disappear beneath the planks. It flows onward unseen, toward the next puppet, the next hour, the next performance. Time moves here, yes, but it dances, it parades, it plays. And that might be the most human way of all to measure a day. You leave the puppet clock behind with a quiet grin, your footsteps syncing some internal rhythm now shaped by gongs, monks, and lute-wielding carp. By this point, the city feels like it's fully awake, except it never quite woke up the way you're used to. It simply unfolded, petal by petal, like a slow lotus at dawn. Your path winds through a narrow residential alley where thin strings of laundry stretch above your head like prayer flags. Below them, a grandmother sweeps her stoop, her broom scraping rhythmically across the stone. The scrape becomes a sort of timekeeper. 2. A local cue that another domestic day has begun. But what really draws you forward is a whiff of something unexpectedly sweet. Toasted sesame? No. Molasses and vinegar? Almost. You turn the corner and find yourself face to face with an incense timer, smoldering quietly in a brass spiral outside a small scholar's home. You've seen incense before. What's new is a purposeful shape. A long coil hanging like a lazy spiral staircase from a wooden stand. The scholar, peering through pince-nez glasses, adjusts a small wooden bead that sits poised above the coil, ready to drop once the next segment burns away. This is not a clock for the masses. It's personal timekeeping, and it's intimate. Mainstream historical sources describe these incense timers, called xianglu, as widespread during the Tang and Song dynasties, particularly among scholars, poets, and calligraphers. The idea was simple. Each coil or stick burned for a predictable duration, often 15 minutes to an hour, and could be marked with beads, metal balls, or powders that would fall audibly at specific points. Need to study for an hour? Burn a half coil. Hosting tea and poetry? Try a sandalwood stick marked to chime, gently at the half-hour mark. The scholar notices you watching. Without a word, he offers a tiny stool and gestures for you to sit. The incense tickles your nose with a mellow sweetness, something between cinnamon and driftwood. And then, clink, a metal bead drops into a small dish, announcing the passage of a single unit of thought. Not time, thought. Here's a lovely fringe fact. Some incense timers were custom carved with poetic notches rather than strict minutes. One example read, "When the first ash falls, ponder Confucius. When the second, take tea. When the third, compose a verse or regret not doing so." Historians still argue whether these timers were developed independently in China or were borrowed from earlier Indian or Persian incense traditions. The debate centers around archaeological gaps and vague mentions in early trade texts. What is clear, though, is that these smoke clocks weren't about deadlines. They were about mood. You close your eyes and breathe it in. Not all time needs to be struck or paraded. Some time just glows slowly, humming in a scented haze. Some time makes you quieter, makes your thoughts stretch and soften like warm silk. As the scholar gently brushes his calligraphy scroll, you can't help but notice how the ash of the incense doesn't scatter. It curls, neatly, like everything else here. It obeys a rhythm. Clink. Another bead falls. Another invisible minute. Captured without numbers. You thank the scholar with a quiet bow and move on. But the scent clings to your robe, and now every breath feels like it's passing through velvet. Time, today, has a fragrance. You walk on, trailing that scent like a secret. The incense has eased something in your chest, loosened it, maybe like your thoughts are silk threads instead of tangled earbuds. And as you wander deeper into the city's midday rhythm, a new sound joins the atmosphere, a steady drip echoed by a soft ticking. You follow into a quiet courtyard half shaded by painted eaves. A wide bronze basin sits in the center, filled nearly to the brim with water. Suspended above it is a perforated ladle, dripping in time, like the slowest metronome ever built. And nearby, balanced delicately on a pivoting arm, is the reason for this setup, a clepsydra or water clock. You've heard the term before, probably in some dusty footnote in high school. But here it is in the flesh, well, in the water, and somehow it's beautiful, mesmerizing, less ancient calculator, more liquid sculpture with a secret. The concept is simple. As the ladle slowly fills, its weight increases until, plunk, it tips and empties itself into the basin below, triggering a mechanism that moves a marker along a cardboard. In this case, the marker is a jade turtle, inching across a lacquered scale, engraved with Chinese characters. Each section marks an imperial hour, double the length of a Western one. Mainstream records tell us that water clocks were among the earliest regulated timekeepers in Chinese civilization, dating back to at least the Zhou dynasty, around 1046 BCE. These were not humble tools. They were symbols of state precision. Court astronomers used them. Emperors trusted them. The clepsydra was time, measured in the most serene of units, drips. But what sets Chinese clepsydras apart from their Western counterparts is the artistry. Rather than cold dials or raw mechanics, Chinese designs incorporated animals' calligraphy, even storytelling. Some used floating puppets. Others had musical chimes that struck soft tones each time a ladle tipped. A quirky tidbit. One Song-era clock reportedly featured a small, carved cricket that would sing through a hidden bell every third tipping, marking a half-hour increment with what they called whimsy and wing. You glance around and realize no one's guarding this. There's no rope or plaque or docent. It's just there, gently ticking in an open courtyard. A small boy passes by, barely glancing at it. To him, it's just part of the scenery, like a well or a tree. Historians still argue whether the Chinese clepsydra developed entirely independently or was influenced by Mesopotamian examples. Some say the basics came via Silk Road contacts. Others argue for full native invention. But again, what's beyond debate is the cultural layering. How something utilitarian became an object of meditation. You crouch beside the basin, listening. The courtyard is quiet. The water sings. Plink. Tock. Silence. Plink again. It's not commanding you, not alerting you, just inviting you to notice. And then you do notice the shadow of the eaves has moved slightly. The turtle has inched half a segment forward. Someone's teacup clinks in a nearby room. The city keeps going. But something in you slows. Because this is time as experience. Time as grace. And as you rise to leave, you realize you've stopped checking your own pulse, your own worries, your own what next. You started listening for turtles and crickets instead. You wander farther now, and the city seems to shimmer in a mid-afternoon lull, like the whole place is suspended between tea and twilight. The clamor has softened. Even the vendors are quieter. Their sleeves roll back as a fan skewers over charcoal, humming tunes with no urgency whatsoever. But your next stop is less aromatic and more metallic, because someone somewhere nearby is winding something, Not a lute, not a water wheel. It's more tick-tock, less plink-plunk. And as you round a narrow gate bordered by painted stone lions, you stumble into something rare, an artifact of both foreign flair and native ingenuity. The Imperial Mechanical Clock Tower. Standing tall at the heart of an official compound is a structure half pagoda, half machine. Something like a hybrid between a Buddhist temple and a gear enthusiast fever dream. Polished brass gleams on the tiled roof. Below that, delicate hands, yes, literal clock hands, arc across the faces of several rotating dials. This is the astronomical clock designed by Su Song in the 11th century, one of China's most ambitious time-keeping marvels. You've read about it in passing, but seeing a recreation in action is something else entirely. Gears were softly beneath wooden panels. A celestial globe rotates in the upper tier, showing constellations shifting slowly over the empire sky. Tiny wooden figures, civil servants in miniature, emerge from side doors at designated hours, bowing mechanically before disappearing again. They're not for show. They're announcements. A moving calendar mapped to stars. Mainstream history tells us Su Song's original clock tower was over 30 feet high and used an early escapement mechanism, a crucial innovation that wouldn't be fully reinvented in Europe until centuries later. Powered by a water wheel regulated through feedback systems, this clock didn't just tell time, it told the heavens. But here's the twist. Most of this tech was lost after the Jin dynasty took over and carted off the original. The surviving diagrams are all we have. And so, what you're seeing now is a scholar's reconstruction, based on blueprints that barely survived the dynastic chaos. It's guesswork. Educated, beautiful guesswork. Historians still argue whether the escapement in Su Song's design functioned as cleanly as the texts imply. Was it a proto-mechanical breakthrough or a kind of guided illusion, too delicate to last, more sculpture than machine? Either way, you're watching time tick in layers, metal, wood, and sky. A side panel opens and a tiger puppet appears, yawns dramatically, and rings a soft bell with its tail. The 7th hour. A passing clerk chuckles. He never gets tired of that bit. He says, not even looking up, you smile, because somehow that's what this whole experience feels like. A society that understands time not as a march, but as a rhythm, something to be marked with beauty, tracked with philosophy, and, when necessary, announced by a puppet tiger who's been doing this for decades without a single day off. As you back away from the clock tower, the bells shift again. This time, a melody, a soft series of descending notes you recognize from morning temple rituals. It's not an alarm. It's a blessing. Time here doesn't jolt. It invites. It encourages. And as your gaze tilts upward toward the rotating heavens, the sky blue lacquer of the dome catching fireflies of sunlight, you realize something. You've stopped keeping time. You've started trusting it. You drift from a clock tower like a leaf caught in a warm current. There's no rush now, no plan, just a gentle nudge of curiosity, like a hand at the small of your back. Through a winding corridor of paper lanterns and half-shuttered doors, you find yourself in a much humbler place. Wooden planks underfoot, the smell of ink and steamed rice in the air. This isn't a palace or workshop. It's someone's home. And inside it, tucked against a bamboo wall, sits a bedroom-sized riddle, a curious box bristling with rods, strings, and hanging weights. At first glance, it looks like an overbuilt birdcage, but then you notice the brass dish at the top, lined with polished pins, and the weighted rope that dangles beside it tied just so. And on the opposite wall, a bundle of dried herbs hangs with note attached, carefully inked in a neat hand. You squint to read it. Wake me before the third watch. Gently, please. This isn't a grand device from a court or observatory. This is someone's personal alarm clock. And suddenly, the abstract becomes intimate. You imagine the routine, a scholar rising before dawn to copy text by lamplight, a midwife needing to catch the next laboring cry from across the courtyard, a cook waking in the chilly dark to start breakfast porridge by second bell. These early alarms weren't loud. They weren't annoying. They were precise, weighted, and often kind. Some used slow-burning incense sticks with embedded threads that, when burned through, would release a counterweight that tapped a bell. Others used dripping water on stretched parchment to soften the wake-up with gradual moisture. One elaborate variant used a falling bead that clinked onto a cymbal, barely enough to wake you if you were ready, not enough to jolt you if you weren't. Mainstream texts confirm that personal timekeeping in ancient China was more common than you'd expect, especially among scholars, monks, and the wealthier artisan class. While commoners often relied on rooster calls or drum towers, those with the means preferred self-contained timers tuned to incense or water flow. And here's a fringe tidbit. In some Taoist temples, monks trained to wake at the precise moment a stick of incense split in half. No mechanical backup, just sheer internal rhythm. Some claimed it was a spiritual skill tied to chi alignment. Others suspected decades of practice and no social life. Historians still argue whether these personal devices were widespread or the exception. Archaeological finds are rare, but scrolls and poetry from the Tang and Song dynasties mention them often enough to suggest they were valued, even customized. You sit beside the wooden box, noticing how the rope threads through a pulley and dangles just so. The weight is small, maybe a stone wrapped in silk. If you slept beside it, the soft click would nudge you, just enough. Time here isn't something shouted at you. It's a whisper, a gentle tug at your sleeve. And you wonder, how many moments were saved by these quiet inventions? How many tea rituals started at the perfect hour because a cord was burned, a drop fell, a bell chimed? Not all revolutions are loud. Some arrive on time and knock politely. As you rise to leave, you look back once more. That inked note still sways gently. Wake me before the third watch. Gently, please. It's such a human thing to ask. And somehow, it makes you feel more connected to this world than any throne room or observatory could. Back outside, the light is softened to a golden haze. The kind of evening where shadows stretch like cats and lanterns begin flickering before they're even needed. The rhythm of the city changes with the light. Footsteps slow, voices quiet, and the air thickens with incense, sesame oil, and the faint metallic tang of bell bronze cooling in the breeze. You find yourself walking towards sound again, not a clang or a chime this time, but a pulse. A rhythmic thump you feel in your chest before you even know what you're hearing. And then you see it, the drum tower. It rises above the city like a patient sentinel, square, layered, and solid, with wide eaves and rows of red columns. Even from this distance, the giant drum at the top is unmistakable. Its hide taut and sun-stained, flanked by others smaller, but no less dignified. The tower keeper is already climbing the steps. It's almost a night watch, the first drumbeat of the evening. You follow behind, ascending the creaking stairway. The scent of dust and lacquer thick in your nose. And when you reach the top platform, you feel it. Not just a view, but the anticipation. Everything down below, market stalls, tea houses, bath houses, is waiting for this signal. Because in ancient Chinese cities, the drum tower wasn't just a landmark. It was the city's heartbeat. Mainstream history tells us the drum tower, paired with the bell tower, regulated urban life. The bell rang at dawn to open the gates. The drums sounded at dusk to close them. Between them, a complex schedule of beats and intervals marked the passage of watches, roughly 2-hour segments, often monitored by officials. But here's a quirk. These were not harsh signals. The rhythm mattered. Different watches had distinct beat patterns, sometimes encoded with regional flair or ceremonial significance. One city might mark midnight with 4 slow beats and 2 quick ones. Another might play a short melody on wooden fish before striking the main drum. It wasn't just timekeeping, it was identity. And then it starts. The drumbeat rolls across the rooftops like thunder in slow motion. You feel it in your ribs. The crowd below stills. Peddlers pack up. Lanterns are lit. And for one delicious moment, everything is synchronized. Historians still argue whether the earliest drum tower models date to the Zhou dynasty or came later during the Han. Some claim even Neolithic settlements use a form of communal time drumming, though the evidence is mostly speculative. But what's certain is this. For centuries, these towers kept cities breathing in unison, waking, working, resting. The tower keeper turns to you with a grin. "Ever hit one?" he asks, nodding at the smaller drum beside him. You hesitate, but then your hand touches the drumstick, polished wood, worn smooth, and you tap once. Boom. Not loud, but full. It feels rounded, like the sound is embracing you. That second watch, the keeper jokes, "Give me third next time." And he starts another sequence, measured, practiced, oddly comforting. The tower doesn't shout. It affirms. The sun drops below the horizon. Lamps flare across tiled roofs like stars finding their marks. And the drum fades, not because the time is gone, but because it's been acknowledged. Time isn't a tyrant here. It's a collaborator. A gentle reminder that another watch has passed, and you're still here. You take one last look from the tower's edge. The rooftops below washed in peach and ink blue. Somewhere, a tea kettle begins to hiss. Somewhere else, a child yawns. The next rhythm is rest. You wander deep into the sleeping city now. The noises have thinned into murmurs, an occasional clink of porcelain, a sleepy dog barking once before returning to its dreams. But you're still not ready to leave. Not quite, because something's tugging at the back of your mind, a question half-formed. What happened next? What became of these ancient alarms once dynasties crumbled, once foreign ideas flowed into ports, once gunpowder and factory bells replaced water, drums, and wind? You find your answer in the unlikeliest of places. A dusty curio shop sits crookedly at the edge of the Scholars' Quarter, where ivy grips the roof tiles like an old man refusing to let go. Inside, the air smells of parchment and powdered sandalwood. Shells groan under the weight of trinkets that whisper more than shout. And on one of those shelves, tucked between a bronze inkwell and a chipped Confucius figurine, sits what looks like a teapot with legs. You tilt your head. A kettle? A lantern? "No," says the shopkeeper behind you, his voice raspy with age and maybe mischief. It's a clepsydra alarm, late Qing dynasty. poor man's wake-up call. You lean closer. It's a miniature water clock, but not like the stately palace versions. This one's jerry-rigged, intimate. A tiny reservoir drips steadily into a lower chamber. But here's the magic. A weighted float inside rises with the water until it hits a tiny lever. That lever drops a pin. That pin releases a spring. And bang! A bell hidden under the lid rings like a hotel concierge trying to summon a bellhop in 1890 Shanghai. It's beautiful in its absurdity. A Rube Goldberg alarm, centuries old. Mainstream scholars note that by the 19th century, Chinese timekeeping had begun to absorb European mechanical methods. But that transition wasn't a clean swap. It was a blending. Inventors in southern China began modifying Western clocks with native principles, fusing escapements with incense timers, pairing chiming gears with wind chimes, sometimes just for fun. Some Qing courtiers kept dual clocks, one Western-style pendulum, one traditional water clepsydra, just to compare how their minutes felt differently. And here's the fringe bit. In some rural areas, people flat out distrusted mechanical clocks. They believed machines had no spirit. That time without nature was sterile. So even if they owned a British table clock, they'd still light incense at dawn or listen for frogs at dusk. Historians still argue whether this resistance was philosophical, practical, or simply stubborn. Perhaps it was all three. But it gives you pause. Because there's something profoundly human about resisting the tick-tick-tick of gears and choosing instead the murmur of water, the chime of air, the thud of a mallet on hide. The shopkeeper chuckles. Want to hear it ring? You nod. He pours water into the top chamber, adjusts the float, and sets it down. You both wait. Drip, drip. Silence wraps around you like a warm scarf. Then, ping. Not loud, not shrill, just enough to make your heart smile. You close your eyes. And suddenly, the whole journey floods back in. The polished bronze bowls, the scent of sandalwood threads, the weight of a water clock pulley, the velvet footfalls around an incense burner, the echoing beat of a drum tower, the sigh of wind against a carved reed. Time, here, is not a master. It's a companion, a guide, nudging your elbow, not yanking your collar. And in that moment, surrounded by relics that once whispered people awake, you realize something rather beautiful. Maybe ancient alarm clocks didn't sound so ancient at all. Maybe they were just a little more polite. Word count, 1,068. Wind down, final 300 words. The city softens, settling into sleep like a scroll rolled gently shut. You step outside the shop and feel the hush that follows a story's end. The lanterns have dimmed, but their glow lingers faintly, like embers under silk. Even the air seems to whisper now, as if every surface, tile, brick, bell, leaf, has taken a breath and exhaled. You breathe with it. Each sound from earlier, the drip of water, the flutter of incense ash, the hollow thud of a midnight drum, echoes now in memory, soft and slow. Time, once a current tugging you forward, now becomes a pool to float in. You imagine lying on cool stone, forehead kissed by moonlight, as one last chime rings somewhere far away. It doesn't wake you. It welcomes you, like an old friend arriving just as your eyes begin to close. The world around you still ticks and hums and rings, of course. But here, tonight, it has slowed for you. It has offered you rhythm, not rush. It has reminded you that even the loudest alarms can come from a gentle place. So rest now. Let the sounds drift farther and farther away, like boats on a quiet lake. And if you wake in the night, don't worry. Somewhere, a wind chime might be whispering you back to sleep. Sweet dreams.